You're probably staring at a real estate listing right now, right? You're looking at the, I don't know, the gleaming quartz countertops, the perfectly angled throw pillows, the fresh paint.
And you're thinking, I'm priced out. This is way too expensive.
Exactly. You feel the pain of these high interest rates and inflated housing prices, and it just feels like the game is entirely rigged for the ultra wealthy. But, and here's the secret, what if the actual mechanics of real estate wealth have absolutely nothing to do with those countertops?
Yeah. What if the real money is being made in this hidden financial landscape that's completely invisible to the naked eye?
Today, we are ripping the drywall off the real estate market. We're going to hand you the exact architectural blueprints, the tax codes, and the risk management systems that everyday people use to transition from, accidental property owners into generational wealth builders. Let's get into it.
I love that intro because honestly, the problem with the modern real estate conversation is that it's completely dominated by the aesthetic and the immediate.
Right, like HGTV flips.
Exactly. We judge an investment by its curb appeal or its day one cash flow. But true wealth in real estate isn't about making a massive, dramatic move that looks great on a reality TV show.
No, it's not.
It's a slow, methodical compounding of small, highly strategic decisions over decades. I mean, it is about understanding the structural physics of leverage, the tax code, and, frankly, market timing.
And if you're sitting there right now feeling completely paralyzed by the pressure to buy a flawless investment property right out of the gate, you really need to hear about this guy in Provo, Utah.
Oh, yeah, the townhome story.
Yeah, because his entry into this invisible financial engine didn't start with like a top hat, a monocle, and $1 million commercial loan. It started entirely by accident.
Completely by accident.
Consider this scenario. This guy buys a basic townhome in Provo for $124,500. It's nothing special at all. He moves in. He sits down on the floor of the empty living room, feels the warm air blowing out of the heater vent onto his back, and he just starts laughing.
Which is such a great visual.
It really is, because for the first time in his life, he realizes he's paying himself. He's the owner.
And that visceral moment on the heater vent, that is the psychological crossing of the Rubicon.
Yeah.
It's the shift from consumer to owner.
Yeah.
Because when you rent, your housing payment is a pure expense. It's capital that's leaving your ecosystem forever.
It's gone.
But when you own, a portion of that payment is effectively a forced savings account. But the actual wealth-building journey for this specific individual didn't kick into high gear on move-in day.
No, it escalated when he eventually found another unit about, a quarter mile away that backed up to a park?
Yeah, he decided he wanted to live there instead,
Yeah.
which is a completely normal life progression.
Right. You get a new job, you want a better view, you outgrow your starter space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead of calling a realtor and selling that first $124,500 townhome to fund the next one, he made a profoundly different choice. He basically typed up a basic Word document contract, left his heavy couch in the living room, and rented out the individual rooms in that first townhome for like $300 to $350 a month to some roommates.
Okay, let's unpack this math because this is where the engine starts turning. The mortgage on that first Provo townhome was roughly $879 a month. By just getting a few people in there at $300 to $350 a pop, he's pulling in around $950 to $1,050 a month.
Right.
So the mortgage is completely covered. He isn't out there aggressively trying to be some, real estate mogul. He literally just didn't want to carry his heavy furniture down the stairs, so he kept the old place and leased it out.
And that seemingly minor, lazy decision to keep the property and rent the rooms, that is the gateway to everything else we're going to discuss today. Because by keeping that asset, he allowed time and macroeconomic forces to act upon it.
Which is huge. Let's fast forward a few years here.
Yeah, so this same individual is sitting at his kitchen table, completely stressed out about $49,000 in student loan debt.
The worst.
Right. That is a $325 monthly payment hanging over his head for the next 25 years. It is a massive psychological burden.
So he decides it might be time to liquidate that first townhome to relieve the pressure, right?
Exactly. He consults a real estate professional, figuring, hey, maybe I can list the property for around $159,900.
Yeah.
If he does that, he walks away with maybe 25 or 30 grand in equity.
Which, let's be honest, most people would consider a massive win. You bought it for around 24, you sell for around 59, you take your 30 grand and you go on vacation or, pay down a chunk of debt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the real estate professional does a proper competitive market analysis, a deep dive into the comparable sales in that specific Provo neighborhood, and tells him, no, the market has moved significantly. We can list this for $177,900.
Wow.
And because they positioned it right, they actually ended up selling it for $183,900, with the buyer covering the closing costs.
Okay, let that sink in for a second. He bought it for $124,500. He sells it for $183,900. In one single transaction, that suffocating $49,000 student loan debt was wiped off the face of the earth. Gone, instantly.
And he still had enough cash left over to completely finish the basement of his new property.
That's incredible.
The realization he had after signing those closing documents was simply, wait, I am a real estate investor. Because the success didn't require some masterstroke of genius, it just required holding on to a primary residence and letting the market do the heavy lifting.
And this brings up a fundamental mechanical truth about real estate that beginners entirely overlook. The primary residence is often the absolute best first investment you will ever make.
100%. If
Yeah.
you walk into a bank today and say, I want to buy a dedicated rental property, the bank is going to view you as a high-risk commercial entity.
Oh yeah, they're going to want a massive down payment.
Exactly. They're going to demand a 20% to 25% down payment. They're going to charge you an interest rate that is significantly higher than a residential rate. And because of those high carrying costs, that property might yield negative cash flow from day one.
But if you buy a primary residence, you're playing by a completely different set of rules.
Mhm.
The government and the banking system desperately want you to own a home.
So they subsidize it.
Right. So you can get an FHA loan for 3.5% down or a conventional loan for 5% down. You live in it for a year or two, you satisfy the primary residence requirement of the loan, and then you move out and rent it.
You effectively acquire a high leverage, low interest investment property through the back door.
It's like a hermit crab changing shells. You outgrow your first shell, but instead of throwing it away, you lease it out to another crab. You just keep collecting the shells.
That is the exact strategy. But we do have to address the current macroeconomic reality because the rules of the game have shifted since that Provo townhome was purchased.
For sure. The market is totally different now.
Right. We are currently in a high interest rate, high price environment. So if you buy a primary residence today, live in it for a year, and then move out to rent it, the market rent might not actually cover your new mortgage.
Yep.
You might find yourself in a position where the mortgage is $3,000, but the property only rents for $2,500. You have to subsidize that property by $500 a month out of your own pocket.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this because if I am pulling $500 out of my checking account every single month just to keep this property afloat, that feels like a massive liability, not an asset. How on earth can a professional investor look at a property that is bleeding $6,000 a year and call that a winning investment?
I get it. It is the most common mental block for novice investors. They look at that negative $500 a month and they panic. They think, I am losing money. I need to sell.
Because it hurts every month.
It does hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But they are making a fundamental error in how they calculate wealth.
Yeah.
They're confusing cash flow with yield. Cash flow, that monthly money in your pocket, is just one piece of the puzzle. It's the visible tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so what's under the water?
To understand why losing $500 a month in cash flow can actually mean you're generating tens of thousands of dollars a year in net worth, we have to completely rebuild how you evaluate an asset. We have to look holistically at what the industry calls the 4 pillars of real estate wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if we factor in inflation, the 5 streams.
This is exactly where the invisible engine starts to hum. Because if the pros are high-fiving each other over a property that doesn't cash flow on day one, they're looking at math that the amateur is completely blind to. So let's break down this fatal flaw of relying solely on cash flow.
So in commercial real estate, there is a metric called the capitalization rate, or cap rate. It's simply your net operating income divided by the purchase price. Most amateur investors treat this as the holy grail.
If the rent is higher than the mortgage and expenses, it's a good deal. If it's lower, it's a terrible deal.
Exactly. They stop their analysis right there. That is the first pillar, cash flow. But if you stop at the first pillar, you are leaving the vast majority of the wealth on the table. Because the second pillar operating in the background is appreciation.
The invisible escalator.
Exactly. Let's look at the historical data. In strong markets like Utah, which was cited in the materials, the historical average for real estate appreciation is roughly 5.6% to 5.9% year over year.
And that's not just the crazy pandemic boom number.
No, this is the steady, decades-long average. So let's run the math on a conservative $400,000 property. A 5.6% appreciation means the physical asset is growing by over $22,000 a year in market value.
Let me stop you right there because we need to connect this to the $500 monthly loss we just talked about. If I'm subsidizing the rent by $500 a month, that costs me $6,000 over the course of the year out of my checking account.
Right.
But in that exact same year, the property gained $22,000 in equity. So my net wealth didn't go down by $6,000. It actually went up by $16,000.
Precisely. You are effectively trading $6,000 in highly taxed liquid cash for $22,000 in tax-advantaged equity. It is a wildly profitable trade.
That completely flips the script.
And that is only the second pillar. The third pillar is equity build, or principal paydown. When you take out a 30-year fixed mortgage, every single time a payment is made, a fraction of that payment goes toward the interest, and a fraction goes toward paying down the actual principal balance of the loan.
I want to dive into the mechanics of this because amortization schedules are fascinating. In the first few years of a 30-year mortgage, the bank front-loads the interest. You're paying mostly interest and very little principal.
Yep.
But even in year one, on a $400,000 loan, you might be paying down a few $100s of principal every month.
And here's the magic of the rental model. You are not paying that principal down. The renter is. Even if you are subsidizing the mortgage by $500, the renter is paying the other $2,500.
Wow.
Their labor, their 9-to-5 job, is funding the aggressive paydown of your debt. It's a forced savings account that someone else is contributing to every single month. By year 10, that principal paydown accelerates massively. Your debt is shrinking while the asset's value is inflating.
Okay, so we have cash flow, appreciation, and principal paydown. What is the fourth pillar?
The fourth pillar involves the massive interest deductions and tax advantages, which we're going to explore in profound detail shortly. But basically, the government allows you to write off the cost of the interest you pay on that loan against your income, lowering your overall tax burden.
Right. And then there's a bonus fifth stream that people completely ignore when they panic about negative cash flow, right? Rental rate increases?
Yes. This is where inflation actually becomes your best friend.
Explain that, because usually inflation is the enemy.
It usually is. But when you lock in a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, the cost of your debt is frozen in time. The principal and interest payment you make in year 1 is the exact same payment you make in year 29. But rents do not stay frozen. Rents trend upward with inflation. So that $500 monthly loss you are taking in year 1, by year 3 or 4, as you implement modest 3% to 5% annual rent increases, that gap entirely closes.
So you stop bleeding cash pretty quickly.
Exactly. By year 5, you cross over into positive cash flow. And by year 10, the rent has far surpassed your frozen mortgage payment, and you are netting significant monthly income. The negative cash flow was just a temporary entry fee to acquire the asset.
To really drive this home, we have to look at the difference between basic ROI return on investment and IRR internal rate of return, because beginners calculate ROI and professionals calculate IRR. Let's do some napkin math here to show how wild this leverage actually gets.
ROI is a very flat calculation. If I buy a property in cash for $100,000 and it yields $10,000 a year in profit, my ROI is 10%. But nobody's buying real estate in all cash unless they are institutional players.
Right. Everyday people use leverage. They use the bank's money.
Exactly. Internal rate of return looks at the actual hard cash you personally deployed into the deal, annualized over time, factoring in all the pillars we just discussed. Let's look at a $500,000 primary home purchase. If you use a conventional loan, you might only put 5% down. That is $25,000 of your actual money.
And the bank brings the other $475,000 to the closing table. They take 95% of the capital risk.
Correct. Your total capital exposure is $25,000. Now, let's say that $500,000 property experiences that average 5% appreciation this year. The physical property gained $25,000 in total value.
Wait, if I put $25,000 of my own money in, and the property gains $25,000 in equity in 12 months.
You've achieved a 100% internal rate of return on your actual cash invested in year 1, purely from the appreciation pillar. Your money effectively doubled its footprint in 365 days.
That is insane to think about.
And this is before we even calculate the principal paydown the tenant is providing or the tax write-offs. You are capturing the appreciation on the bank's $500,000 while only keeping $25,000 of your own chips on the table.
That is the hidden engine. You're weaponizing the bank's capital to inflate your own net worth. And this dynamic is exactly what sparked the famous epiphany from Ray Kroc, the man who built McDonald's into a global empire.
Oh, this is a legendary story.
Yeah, so there's the story where Kroc is struggling in the early days. He's selling franchises, he's selling hamburgers, but he's bleeding cash. The margins on beef and potatoes are razor thin.
Right.
He's talking to a financial advisor, and the advisor looks at the books and says, Ray, you seem to not understand the business that you are actually in. You are not in the burger business, you are in the real estate business.
It was a complete paradigm shift that altered corporate history. Kroc realized that the business model of selling hamburgers was just a mechanism to cover the carrying costs of the debt. The true wealth wasn't the food. It was the fact that the McDonald's corporate entity owned the physical land underneath every single franchisee's restaurant.
The physical structure of the restaurant degrades over time, right? Fryers break, roofs leak, the building depreciates. But the dirt underneath it, the prime corner lot at a busy intersection, that appreciates exponentially.
Absolutely.
Kroc was capturing the massive leveraged appreciation of thousands of prime commercial real estate corners across the entire country. The burgers and fries were literally just subsidizing the monthly holding costs of the land.
And that is exactly how you have to view your rental properties. The tenant's rent is the hamburger. It just pays the mortgage and the maintenance. The true wealth is the land and the structure appreciating, the debt amortizing, and the tax codes protecting it all.
Speaking of the physical structure degrading over time, that brings us to the most misunderstood and frankly the most aggressively lucrative pillar of this entire system,
Yeah.
the tax advantages.
Yes.
Because building wealth is only half the battle. The other half is legally shielding that wealth from taxation. And the tax codes we're about to unpack sound like they should be illegal, but they are entirely by design.
They are the absolute cheat codes of the wealthy. And they revolve around a concept called cost segregation and the 1031 exchange.
Okay, I have to admit, cost segregation sounds like a phrase engineered in a laboratory to make normal people fall asleep. It sounds like a corporate accounting compliance seminar.
Oh, it's a terrible name for what is essentially a wealth acceleration machine. To understand cost segregation, we have to start with the foundational concept of depreciation. The IRS lives in reality when it comes to physical assets.
What do you mean by that?
They understand that a building is not a permanent, immortal structure. Roofs cave in, HVAC systems die, plumbing corrodes. Because the asset physically deteriorates, the government allows real estate investors to depreciate the value of a residential property over 27.5 years.
Let me translate that. The IRS allows you to take the purchase price of the building, not the land, because dirt doesn't wear out, but the building itself, divide it by 27.5, and deduct that number from your taxable income every single year. You get to pretend the house is losing value on your taxes, even while the market is pushing the actual resale value of the property up.
Exactly. You are claiming a phantom loss on paper to offset your real-world income. That standard 27.5-year straight-line depreciation is powerful enough on its own. But cost segregation takes this concept and injects it with rocket fuel through a system called MCRS.
MCRS.
Yeah, the Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System. Instead of spreading that depreciation out evenly over 3 decades, you hire a specialized engineering or tax firm to perform a cost segregation study on the property.
Okay, but what exactly does an engineering firm do in this scenario? Do they just look at photos of the house?
No, they physically send engineers or utilize detailed architectural blueprints to walk the property and break the entire structure down into its individual component parts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The IRS dictates that the structural framing, the foundation, and the core walls depreciate over 27.5 years. But the carpet, the microwave, the specialty light fixtures, the exterior stair railings, the parking lot asphalt, those items do not last 27.5 years. The IRS categorizes them as 5-year, 7-year, or 15-year property.
Okay, but why does the IRS care if my living room carpet wears out faster than my drywall? How does that benefit me?
Because once those assets are reclassified into shorter lifespans, the tax code allows you to legally accelerate all of that depreciation into the first few years of ownership. You can front-load decades worth of tax write-offs into year 1.
That's incredible.
There's a staggering real-world example of this exact mechanism. An investor bought a condo and paid an engineering firm roughly $3,500 to perform a cost segregation study. The engineers broke down the appliances, the flooring, the fixtures, and handed the report to the investor's CPA.
Okay, and what was the result?
That single $3,500 study allowed the investor to write off $52,000 of accelerated depreciation in their very first year of owning the property.
Hold on, I want to make sure the math on this is crystal clear for everyone listening. They didn't actually spend $52,000 on renovations.
No.
They didn't lose $52,000. The property was probably going up in value. But on their tax return, they get to lower their total taxable income by $52,000.
Correct. They wiped out $52,000 of their income from the IRS's view. And here's what that means in actual hard cash. If that investor is sitting in roughly a 24% tax bracket, reducing their taxable income by $52,000 means they literally avoid paying about $12,500 in actual taxes.
Wow.
That is $12,500 of cold, hard cash that stays in their personal checking account instead of going to the federal government. They spent $3,500 to generate the study, and they netted $12,500 in tax savings.
That is almost a 400% return on the cost of the study in a matter of months. We talked earlier about the renters subsidizing the mortgage, but this is literally the federal government subsidizing your investment portfolio, which begs a massive question.
Which is?
Why? Why on earth does the IRS allow investors to legally avoid taxes like this? It sounds like a loophole that someone should have closed decades ago.
It's not a loophole. It is a highly intentional incentive structure. You have to look at the macro goals of a nation. The government relies on the private sector to provide housing for the population. Building, maintaining, and managing housing infrastructure is incredibly capital-intensive and highly risky.
Right. The government does not want to be in the business of building public housing blocks for hundreds of millions of people.
Exactly. So how do they solve the housing crisis? They write tax codes that heavily incentivize private citizens to put their personal capital at risk to provide housing. The accelerated depreciation is the carrot the government dangles to convince you to keep buying and rehabbing properties.
Okay, I understand the incentive, but there has to be a catch. The IRS is notoriously thorough. They don't just let you write off 52 grand, pocket the tax savings, and ride off into the sunset with no strings attached.
You're right, there is a catch.
What happens if I buy the condo, take that huge $52,000 write-off in year 1, and then flip the condo in year 3 for a massive profit?
Ah, that is the trapdoor. It's called depreciation recapture. And it destroys amateur investors who don't understand the long-term game.
How does it work?
If you sell that property, the IRS looks at the transaction and says, hold on a second. You told us this property was degrading and losing value, and we let you take a massive tax break based on that assumption. But you've just sold it for a profit. The property didn't lose value. We need those tax breaks back.
Oh, wow.
When you sell, the IRS forces you to pay taxes on all the depreciation you claimed over the years, often at your ordinary income tax rate.
So it's a boomerang effect. You get the huge tax break up front, but the moment you liquidate the asset and take the cash, the IRS hits you with a massive compounded tax bill that could easily wipe out a huge chunk of your actual equity.
Exactly. This is why professional real estate investing is an earnest, strategic, long-term game. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme if you treat it like day trading. If you buy, accelerate depreciation, and sell a year later, the recapture tax will absolutely crush you.
Which naturally leads to the ultimate question: how do the wealthy actually avoid the recapture trap? If you can never sell the property without triggering the tax bomb, how do you ever access the wealth to grow your portfolio?
You utilize Section 131 of the Internal Revenue Code, the 1031 exchange.
The 1031 exchange is legendary, but the mechanics are incredibly strict. I like to think of a 1031 exchange not as a snowball rolling down a hill, which is the cliche everyone uses, but more like a high-speed video game checkpoint system.
I like that analogy. Let's hear it.
Let's say you are driving a car at your property. It's full of equity, but it's running out of gas. You want a bigger, faster car. If you pull over, turn off the engine, and sell the car for cash, the IRS instantly catches you and takes 30% of your money in capital gains and depreciation recapture. The game is over.
But the 1031 exchange allows you to swap cars while you are still driving.
Exactly. You never turn the engine off. You take the equity from the sale of the first property and immediately transfer it directly into the purchase of a new, larger property. You never actually touch the cash.
And because you never touch the cash, the IRS allows you to defer the capital gains tax and defer the depreciation recapture indefinitely. You just seamlessly jump from a $200,000 condo to a $600,000 fourplex.
But to your point about the checkpoint system, the rules are unforgiving.
Oh, very. You cannot touch the money. You have to use a qualified intermediary, a legally neutral third party who holds the funds during the transaction. And the clocks are brutally fast. From the day you close on the sale of your old property, you have exactly 45 days to formally identify the new property you intend to buy.
45 days is nothing in commercial real estate. If you miss that deadline by 1 minute, the entire exchange collapses and the tax bomb detonates.
It detonates immediately. And once you identify the target property within 45 days, you have exactly 180 days from the original sale to completely close on the new property.
That's a lot of pressure.
It requires intense planning and execution. But if you hit the checkpoints, you trade like-kind asset for like-kind asset. You upgrade from the fourplex to a 12-unit apartment building, from the apartment building to a commercial retail center. And you defer the taxes in perpetuity throughout your entire life. You are continually leveraging the government's money to build your empire.
But eventually, everybody dies. The game has to end. What happens to this massive deferred tax liability, decades of unpaid capital gains and depreciation recapture, when the investor finally passes away? Does the IRS just confiscate the estate from the kids?
This brings us to the final and most profound tax cheat code in the American legal system, the step-up in basis.
What does that mean?